a lot of these biological age tests are just vanity tests, in my opinion.
Me too.
It's a game. Like I'm 28, you'll see someone's like, well, I'm 60 years old, but my biological age is 24. And I'm just like, cool. What's the algorithm? There's different tests that do it different ways. Some are just literally like a formula based on certain biomarkers from your blood tests. Other ones are looking at other things, that they're drawing from a sample. It's hard to say. Like I've done things where I've done several of the different ones at the same time, got very different results. Now, does that mean that those tests are all BS? I think it's that it's more complex than that. I think the challenge is our organs and systems don't all age at the same rate.
Yeah.
And I think, to say your one number summarizes your biological age, like you could be healthy, crazy healthy and fit and whatever, and you've got all sort of cognitive issues going on and, or heart conditions or vice versa. Like that's where I kind of have an issue where you put one number on something that's way more complex than that.
What's up, everybody? It's Boomer, and I'm back here with another episode of the Smarter Not Harder podcast. Today, I get the pleasure, and this is actually it's always a pleasure for me to host this podcast, but it's fun when you do it with friends. And today, I get to interview Bob Troia. Bob Troia has been around technology, the World Wide Web, really since it was founded. He's been in the space for over 2 decades in the earliest days of the World Wide Web, building websites as we get into today. He's also the co-founder of Awesome Labs, which is a technology company founded with a guy named Jeremy. You'll get introduced briefly to Jeremy over the course of this episode. And they've released apps like Awesome Breathing, a personal favorite, PepCalc, and also now they've come out with SuppTrack, and that's been spun out to a separate company. Bob is also the founder or the persona known as Quantified Bob, and you can go and check out more about Bob Troia at quantifiedbob.com. So what did we get into today? So Bob and I know each other through this area called personal science or quantified self. And we talk specifically about quantified self, why it might be useful in anybody's health regimen, and how you might be able to start performing experiments today. We then evolve the conversation into some of Bob's most successful experiments, which includes one about methylene blue. And we get into, of course, the work that he's doing at Awesome Labs. I hope you enjoy this conversation. We went on for a while, but I'm pretty sure we could have gone on for several more hours. Bob is one of the most genuine people that I know in the health space. He's always there to help, and he's always there to answer and ask very, very smart questions. So please enjoy my conversation with Quantified Bob himself, Bob Troia. All right, here we go. Bob Troia, welcome to the Smarter Not Harder podcast. I've had many conversations with you over the years, most of which I wish I recorded. And so, I guess this is a day where I get to grant my own wish. So welcome to the show.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
So Bob, one thing I've never at least asked you on air, but really dove into is the background of Bob. Before you came into the health world, what were you up to? Like, what was the guy in Brooklyn that I met many years ago? What were you up to before the health world?
Yeah, so my story was from the early days of the World Wide Web and technology. I was kind of thrust into that right out of college. My first job was at one of the first basically agencies that were building websites for these Fortune 500 companies and all that. And, so software, what we think about with AI and all this stuff today, it was just way more simple back then, but we were still reinventing things because we had limitations, and it was fun. It was like a whirlwind where all these kids just out of school working crazy hours. I love technology. We got to, really kind of innovate and just come up with ideas. And the fact that it was wrapped up in sort of with an agency, we meant we could be creative. So I was a technology guy building things, but I was also like, hey, I'd like to try building this or that. And you figure out a way to pitch it to a client so they can, work on something fun. One example was we were doing all the web stuff for remember the Got Milk campaign with the milk mustaches and all that way back in the day. So I was actually back then playing around with chatbots. This is 1996. Yeah, around then.
Anybody that was playing around with chat.
So I was experimenting with like natural language and kind of like doing some stuff around that. And I was like, well, what if I made a chatbot that its persona was it just like loves everything about milk and wants to direct conversations around it, or has information, but you can also just have these odd conversations. And so we pitched it and they went for it. And so when the website launched, one of the things you could do is talk to this thing called the Milk Mystic. And it was like, yeah, it was basically the great grandfather of, I guess, ChatGPT and stuff. But it was the first online chatbot ever. And you could just have these conversations, and we would read all the logs every day. And so some funny conversations would come out of it. So that was kind of the agency days. Over the years, I then got the itch to start my own business. Knew nothing about starting a company. An ex-colleague and myself had said, well, you know what? We've been working other places. Let's start our own digital agency. And so in the late 90s into the early 2000s, had built a pretty successful business around that. When that was happening, I was also spinning off another piece of software that was building early online customer communities built around loyalty programs. So think of like points and rewards and all of that. And it was early on, it was much like entertainment companies like video games and movie studios and all of that. And later on, it moved to like bigger companies, big automotive companies, big airlines, things like that. And that business I exited 9 years ago. And so after that, I said, well, okay, if we backtrack a little more, like in terms of health and wellness, like I grew up, as an athlete, I was always interested in like, how do I, get stronger, run faster, put on weight, all that. And our tools were very simple back then. We didn't have all this technology we did now. But I was really into like things like nutrition and going to the library, reading books about all this stuff. You didn't have the internet back then. And then through college, I was still kind of obsessed with it. But working in the real world, once you're in the adult world, I'll admit, like I for a while, I let myself go a little bit. I mean, we were working our butts off, and and things that was kind of the focus was the career stuff. And then I kind of said, well, let me kind of start tweaking and understanding more about what's going on. Why, okay, I can go exercise more. I can eat like a super low fat meal and do all this other stuff. And for a while it was working. Like I was like, oh, I'm active. I'm doing all these things. But I realized one day, like I had like no energy. I was basically just like burnt out. I was totally burnt out. And as I dug in deeper, I started learning about, integrative and functional medicine and these other areas where you have to kind of rethink things about your belief system and exercise and diet and supplementation and all these other areas. And I was just like, whoa, this is crazy. And around the same time, we were seeing the rise of, the quantified self movement. I thought that's like you and I have a common connection through that, and seeing these other people with like similarly kind of curious about looking at ways to uncover information about themselves and optimize themselves. And that kind of put me in my path. So after I had exited that company, I was like, I was in a fortunate position where I could kind of work on anything I wanted to.
Yeah.
And so I said, okay, let me just kick back for a bit and just kind of like do fun things. And a lot of stuff you're going to throw at the wall and things are just not going to stick. But it was fun. It was like learning. I was learning about things, everything from AI and machine learning, diving much deeper into physiology and biology and all these other areas. And and so as we over those years, though, that's where you saw the rise of a lot of the consumer-based tools like wearables and lab testing and just like precision medicine. All these other things were kind of on the rising up. And so for me, it was like I've been waiting for that for like many years. Being a technology person, I wasn't like, oh, I'm going to set out to solve everything about humanity through AI. I was more just like, let me see if there's simple ways to capture this data for myself and look at ways to like analyze it, optimize it, find insights. Because sometimes it's even just learning about yourself. I'm not necessarily trying to solve something, but you might get a good insight. And so between quantified self and then the rise of what we now call the biohacking movement, which kind of came out of that, and now you're seeing that even splintering now into like longevity and that kind of stuff. It's just been exciting times. Yeah.
I mean, first, you've done a lot, my friend, and it's really exciting to hear more of the background of Bob than I traditionally get into with you. So thank you for opening up a little bit about your entrepreneurial experience too. I want to go now. Let's go into that personal science, quantified self side, right? And I bring up personal science because we had Gary Wolf on the show, which, I mean, you know Gary from way back. And Gary was actually one of the people that introduced me to you, along with, I think, Ben Smart and a few others, right? And these guys have been in the quantified self space along with you for a long time. And you know, I was paying attention broadly from afar, similar to you, looking for like insights on myself, just looking to learn insights. And, you know, one of the things that I always found interesting about your experiments in particular is they were very well structured. And I think before we even get into the structure of that, how would you kind of explain quantified self experiments, these types of things to somebody who were, let's say they were visiting from Mars and had never heard of this before? How would you explain it to somebody?
Well, sure. The sort of tagline they've always used for the quantified self was self-knowledge through data. Yeah. And really, if you think about it, that's what it boils down to. And so you're basically putting together your own self-experiments. Now, that can vary in terms of the structure and how detailed and formal it is. But it's about finding out ways to uncover insights again about yourself, or come to a conclusion, or find correlations in data, et cetera. And remember, quantified self isn't just about health. Like, there are people doing cool experiments about things like tracking their location, or keeping tabs on social encounters with people and family members and friends. And so it's just any area where you can sort of grab data and information. And some of this data may be very quantitative, like hard numbers and all that. And then a lot of people, though, are doing things that are qualitative, like, how do you feel today on a scale of 1 to 5? Like, that's very qualitative. And my 3 and your 3 on a scale are going to be different. But that's the beauty of this whole thing, is that quantified self is essentially just putting together experiments around yourself, using as much or little information as you want in order to uncover these insights and essentially learn more about yourself. Now, if you want to use it to improve yourself or whatever, that's a great byproduct. But at the end of the day, that's not quantified self. Is literally just about gaining insights about yourself.
Do you have a particular favorite experiment you ever run on yourself that, you know, because for example, there's one that always comes to mind when I'm explaining this to somebody about just sort of time scale of cholesterol. And you and I have actually participated in, I think it still might be the largest N of 1 experiment for looking at time series cholesterol data. But do you have a particular experiment that you like to highlight to people when you're giving examples of things that you've looked at over the years? I would say pardon the interruption, but this interruption is totally worthwhile. 2 of the sponsors of this podcast, Health Optimization Medicine and Practice and Transcriptions. At Transcriptions and Health Optimization Medicine and Practice, we practice what is called the reciprocity model. Allow me to explain that for one moment. Give and take. And so Health Optimization Medicine and Practice, our nonprofit, we all donate our time for the nonprofit. And the mission there is to teach doctors and non-doctor healthcare practitioners how to optimize for health rather than treat disease. We do this through online learning and management systems, teaching courses like metabolomics, chronobiology, bioenergetics, and so much more. But we also have a for-profit, and that's Transcriptions, where we provide novel ingredients, novel delivery mechanism, nutraceuticals or nutritional supplements, as you might think of them. These are really solving complex issues for point-in-time solutions. Things like focus, immune system function, and of course, my favorite discussion lately, sleep. If you want to try any of Transcriptions products, head on over to transcriptions.com, use the code POD10. Or if you want to join us, actually, what would be really cool is if you joined us in Colorado this year for the Health Optimization Medicine Practice second annual, actually it's our 3rd annual symposium. Boulder, Colorado, October 17th and 18th at Chautauqua National Park. We're going to have the likes of Tom Scalauer there, Elizabeth Yurth, and a whole bunch of other people. It's going to be fun. It's going to be crazy. It's Boulder, Colorado. We always have a good time. Please come and join us. homehope.org for more.
I mean, I would say one of the earliest experiments I ever did that I would say, like, I actually did it under the quantified self sort of umbrella was an early glucose tracking experiment. And this is like 2012.
Pre-CGM, right? So not.
Well, no, there were CGMs, but there were the ones that like you had to actually get a prescription for that, like type 1 diabetics would wear. It had like a transmitter and a needle you had to stick into your abdomen. Like it wasn't like the ones we have now that you can just put on the back of your arm, for 2 weeks or whatever. But I was using just finger sticks. So I was basically trying to show an experiment where for $30 or $20, you can go buy a finger stick and some test strips. And you can essentially, the meter could read the test strips and give you numbers. You write those numbers into a spreadsheet and just track it. I decided to do the experiment because as I was learning more about type 2 diabetes becoming a problem in our country, and some of it is obviously lifestyle driven, but there's a genetic aspect to it as well. And back then, like when you did your 23andMe reports, it would give you some of these traits. And I had an elevated risk for type 2 diabetes. And I was like, well, but type 2 diabetes, okay, I have an elevated risk. So I should be able to catch that decades in advance, right? So I should be able to, like, if things are bad, or starting to inch up now, I could probably do some interventions to prevent it. So I was like, cool. So I started just tracking my blood sugar a few times a day, keeping at the same times just to keep it, consistent. Got some baselines. And then I was at like the first ever biohacking conference. I think this is like 2013 or something like that.
And this is like Asprey back in the day when it was like a handful of people.
It was, Dave Asprey had put an event together at a bar in San Francisco for the weekend. He like rented it out because it had some outdoor space, indoor space, and we kind of just took it over. And it was about like 60, 70 people there, maybe at tops.
Where you met Jeremy? Or
that's how I met my business partner. That's how I met like a lot of folks that, I'm still great friends with to this day. It was a pretty amazing weekend, actually, like-minded people. But one of the presentations there was this Dr. Alan Cash. He had a substance, oxaloacetate, that he had done some studies and things that showed how it could have some benefits with regulating glucose. So I was like, oh, that's cool. So I'll start taking this substance just to see what would happen, because I had already done the baseline. And so I said, okay, cool. Now let me just do this over a period of, let's say, a month or so. And I took it, and this is a case where, my blood sugar is actually pretty okay to start. Fortunately, wasn't optimal, but I was good, pretty good. And I didn't have crazy spikes or anything like that, but this would keep it more like the band of high to low kind of in check, and it was one of those things where then I was like, that was okay. That's a good insight. I saw some benefit, but I'm not at risk for type 2. I'm at risk genetically, but not in terms of my data. So I was like, well, the bang for the buck in terms of it's not a cheap supplement. So I was like, do I really need it? And I was like, okay, maybe not. So then I said, okay, well, I'm doing these glucose readings. What else can I do? So I would do things like, all the rage now is stuff around meal tracking, right? And CGMs and seeing your spikes and all that. I was basically doing that, with finger sticks. I would be like, oh, if I ate this type of meal and I did this, or I'd see my blood sugar go up if I ate a big bowl of, white rice or whatever. But then if I realized, if I went for a walk right after my meal, your body, you basically bring it right back down.
10 years ahead of everybody else on postprandial walk, right? So
yeah. And then the other aspect of it would be just looking at the data and cause now I've got, let's say at one point I had 7 months of data. If you zoom way out and you see kind of your daily kind of up and down, all these, whenever I was taking those readings, and there was a couple weird areas on the chart, I was like, okay, what are these spikes? And when I kind of looked at my calendar and I was like, oh, I was traveling cross country.
Yeah.
And so air travel cross country kind of had an effect on, mostly I think was west to east. It raised my baseline blood sugar for a few days, even after I landed. It was weird.
The same from east to west, or is it just west to east? I'm curious.
I thought it was more pronounced west to east I think that was, it must just be, probably related to some time zone stuff, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that was that kind of an interesting insight. And similarly, I would look at my average, readings by day of week. Mm-hmm. And I saw that I think it was on Thursdays and Thursdays and Fridays. There was 2 days a week where my baselines would be much lower. And I was like, why is that? That's kind of weird. And I realized that I was playing soccer in the evening on those days. So basically the exercise again was having an impact to bring my, the levels back down. So this is, again, it's kind of a novelty now in 2025, but in 2012 and 13, like, this was like, they were writing articles about what I was doing. They were like, why are generally healthy people tracking their blood sugar? Why the hell are they buying glucose monitors and all that? And it was like, so to me, that was, we talked about an experiment. That was kind of like the first one where I was like, it's literally just one data point. It's not a complicated, you take it, you do some regularity and when you're taking your readings, but it's one data point. And, and then just from that, I got so much like information out of it. So I think from a quantified self perspective, it was actually a really, really valuable kind of, experiment to do for me.
So a question for you, just a follow-on question for that, because one of the experiments that I went on for like a couple of years was trying to reduce down to like a couple of variables, like and I know other people in the community have done this. Like, what are the couple of variables that correlate to having a good day? And obviously good is subjective. Have you ever looked at stuff like that? And I'm curious, like, if you've deduced for you what those variables might be.
I mean, I would say for me, variables, a good day. I'll be honest, like my stuff tends to be less qualitative driven. I'm not one of those.
Even say quantitative wise, like, are there variables that that correlate to you having a good day ahead? Say you wake up and your ring tells you that your HRV overnight was X, right? And would that correlate to your day? Or, for example, in me, like I noticed that lowest resting heart rate when I go to sleep and HRV are two that are good in leading indicators as to what kind of day I'm going to have. Have you done any sort of experimentation on that?
I mean, it's more observational though. It's like I can look at data and know like, okay, yeah, like you just said, if my HRV is at a certain level, that's a pretty good sign from a physiological state that like, okay, I probably, if my HRV is pretty in a good state, it means my sleep was probably in a good state. Why was that? That's the next question. It would be like, well, maybe the night before I ate a very light dinner, I went to bed at a decent time. Maybe I had like good social interactions or did something creative in the evening, that kind of stuff where I was outside a lot the day before in nature. And so I'll look at, metrics like that. But in terms of like, things that can affect, if you say, okay, why, it's like the why, like, why is my HRV high? Why is my,
you eventually have to unpack it, right?
So like you could do things like, so I've got, because again, there's some stuff that's totally like, you can pull off a wearable and all that and look at sleep data and activity data. But I also use, one of my shortcuts is I use this like little habit tracker tool to just track, like I've got a bunch of interventions I might do on any given day. So I might like use a recovery tool, like a NanoV. Do I do any kind of sauna or cold plunge? How long did I do it for? Did I, mouth taping while I was sleeping? Cause I do that pretty regularly. Looking at breath work, did I do breath work? And it was at breath work, like just in the morning, breath work in the morning or the evening, and just, seeing like what things had an effect on that morning, tell me that I'm going to, to have a good day, meaning I'm going to wake up in a good state. I mean, even things like alcohol, I'd say like with like, for example, maybe like in particular, like with like, let's say red wine, I actually have there's like a bell curve where like one or two glasses actually improves. I actually have some better data from that because I feel like it just calms me down a little bit. Yeah. But obviously like then when you go over that bell too much and then it's just going to wreck your sleep and all that. So, and I also think like typically if you're drinking a glass or two of wine, that's going to be mostly in a social environment. So I feel like, I was out with friends, I was at dinner or, and I feel like that to me has a very beneficial effect, because like it's one thing to say like I'm eating this awesome organic grass-fed whatever, but you're like eating it real fast by yourself at the dining room table. It's like, well, you're not really being social, you're not really, you're by yourself. And so I think like we have to kind of think of the other variables there.
Want to kind of now go from where we were in 2012 when you're doing like early days. I created my own CGM, getting my information through, single stick finger pricks and that kind of stuff, right? To where we are today, where you mentioned lab work, and we have an era where you have characters like Brian Johnson who are spending gazillions of dollars a year on trying to be as precise as possible with this idea of living forever. What's your general opinion on where we've come in this space? And do you see any issues with people that try to over quantify themselves?
In terms of over quantifying, the challenge is always, is the data good or not?
Yeah.
And that, to me, it's like, because you can do all these tests and the other things. I mean, listen, I love data, right? And I've always been accused of like, oh, we track New York too. Why are you collecting all this data? You can't handle all this data. And I'm just like, well, because 10 years from now, I can always go back and look at it later, even if I'm not using it today. Like, I want the data. And, I love what's happening, like the innovations that are going on and what we can learn about ourselves. Like, and so in terms of, if someone's out there, maybe not everyone's like, okay, it's not living forever and all that is like, okay, take that, like kind of tagline off the whole thing. But is it giving you insights about yourself? Is some of the stuff that are like diagnostic tools that are very preventative that, we can find out, things that might be hindering us, 10 years in advance or 5 years in advance. Now, I'm not talking about things like cosmetic surgery and all of that. I'm talking more just like,
Bob, I was going to invite you to my trip to Korea if you want to come. Go whenever you want.
Nice. Awesome.
Like
medical tourism, right?
Yeah.
No, but I do think, it's been great to see how far everything has come along. I do think, we got to be careful about when you say, I have magic potion X that's going to make you live forever. I mean, because honestly, how do you prove that they're wrong? Like, most likely the person will not be around by the time you can say that you were wrong. So it's a great sell because you can't be wrong. No one's going to call you out for BS. And that's, that's been going on forever, right? And humanity. Now I do think, the incremental stuff, like, okay, let's just say you might not agree with the live forever thing, but if you're saying, look, this has been shown to have, you can have more healthy years, more, your health span, et cetera, like will increase, by 5 years, 10 years. And what's that worth? Is it worth a lot of, things? Some things are, maybe these folks are, spending the money to do things because there isn't an economy of scale yet. Like, I've done some diagnostic testing that, I've spent $4,000, $5,000 on just because I wanted to do it. I wanted to know that about myself. And I've already seen the price come down by half, and it's going to go down another, like, this was genetic testing, 12 years ago. Now we're seeing it with these diagnostic tools. And now I put $5,000 into a health savings account every year that covers a full body MRI scan, a heart scan, coronary calcium scan, with AI stuff on top of it.
Are you Clearly, or is it something?
Yeah. So Pronovo, Clearly. And now they've got companies doing it for $500 a year. You're getting a barrage of lab testing with all sorts of insights, like a function health, et cetera. And so I put $5,000 into a health savings account. That's my investment. Like, great,
And I guess I love that. And I love how proactive you are. Right. And one of the things you mentioned there that I want to just double click on, I don't know if people double click anymore, but like, it just spend a moment on is the data good or not? Right. And I've personally spent money on things that you later find out are not great, or you're actually doing side-by-side testing to kind of figure out if the integrity of the data is good, meaning, you're running the same test side by side and you get back two different results. How are you running those experiments, or how are you finding out if the data is good or not, right? Because sometimes you're outsourcing quality to the reputation of a brand, and sometimes you're having to run these experiments yourself where you're trying to figure out, is it good? What do you do?
Yeah. I mean, I like to have a second opinion on things, whether it's, my wearable data or, certain types of diagnostics. And, so, I would say, okay, like if you're going to get like a full body MRI or clear scan, I mean, it's a scan, like you'll see something in the image or not, right? So I guess it comes down to there, where if there's something they're detecting that they're like, I don't know, like a micron, whatever, something is so small that you're like, is that really an issue? And, but I think, for other things where like a lot of people like to do these, I mean, I don't want to piss anyone off, but like a lot of these biological age tests are just vanity tests, in my opinion.
Me too.
It's a game. Like I'm 28, you'll see someone who's like, well, I'm 60 years old, but my biological age is 24. And I'm just like, cool. Like do it like, the algorithm, there's different tests that do it different ways. Some are just literally like a formula based on certain, biomarkers from your blood tests. Other ones are looking at other things, that they're drawing from a sample. It's hard to say. Like, I've done things where I've done several of the different ones at the same time, got very different results. Now, does that mean that those tests are all BS? I think it's that it's more complex than that. I think the challenge is our organs and systems don't all age at the same rate. Yeah. And I think, to say your one number summarizes your biological age, like, you could be healthy and crazy healthy and fit and whatever, and you've got all sort of cognitive issues going on, and, or heart conditions or vice versa. Like, you could, and so I that's where I kind of have an issue where you put one number on something that's way more complex than that.
So I want to just back up. You made a very good point there, but I also just want to back up on, let's say, even your HSA account and how you allocate that towards those handful of tests. And maybe going back to initially when you encounter, let's say, a Clearly or a Pronova, which those are maybe slightly easier to prove the quality of. But if you're encountering a new test or a new wearable or a new device, how are you evaluating it? Because like, for the average person, they might see it and they might say, hey, this can be useful in my life. I'm going to buy it, cha-ching. And then you find out 6 months later. I've had this happen with some of the cancer screenings, right? Like, you spend $1,000 and then 6 months later you find out that their data isn't able to be replicated, right? So how do you personally look at evaluating a test before including it in that lovely HSA account?
For me, it was the HSA stuff. For me, is in the bucket of, I guess you'd call it like preventative, diagnostics. So there's a lot of stuff that isn't or not in my HSA. Like, I'll buy. There's a lot of devices and tools, and some of it I'm just curious. I'll buy something. Yeah. Like, I'll just buy it because I'm like, this looks like a cool piece of tech. I haven't really seen it. Let me play around with it, and maybe it's a great piece of tech, but the business, or, maybe after a year, the business goes under or whatever. And so now you're left with a brick. But I was like, well, I made that investment. I made the choice to buy that to play around with it. Right. And there's other things where you buy it, you use it for a little bit, and you kind of like, you get some insights out of it and you set it aside. And then you're like, yeah, I don't need to do this every day. And then, but maybe you go back to it at some point, or you're like, oh yeah, I forgot about that tool. I've got plenty of those. So, in terms of how I evaluate, I mean, if it's something that it's like, I have any kind of concerns about integrity of data, or what are they promising? I'll usually speak to the founders and to the team. I want to like dig in, and like, I have no problem geeking out on the science of things, and, they'll send me papers. They'll, give me all the information I need. And I'll sift through it, and, and I'm never, I give everyone the benefit of the doubt. I don't think anyone's being fraudulent, but I do think, we have a tendency to, like, you're marketers, right? You might oversell some of the, that's the vision. You have the vision of something, but maybe the reality today isn't quite there. So, and sometimes you're like, okay, like, think about anything you bought on Kickstarter, or it's like you're getting the version 1 of it,
Yeah. I want to go into one of your QEG experiments, just because I think it kind of highlights how you evaluate things like supplementation, right? And I know you've done this with Methylene Blue, and look, this is somewhat of a shameless plug, but I wanted to also just kind of highlight for people the diligence you go into when you go into self-experimentation. Let's talk about that. That was a few years ago now. That might have been like early days of COVID or post-COVID. So would love to hear just more about that.
Yeah. So, I'm friends with, Dr. Andrew Hill, who runs, Peak Brain Institute, which is, they do, kind of brain scans, QEGs. They've got offices in like New York and LA and St. Louis and around the country. And then when they were opening a New York office, I was still living in New York at the time. And he was like, hey, if you want to, come by, offer you some, free, we can do some QEGs, cause you want to get a baseline. And it's like, yeah, if you want to do any experiments or anything, like, be happy to like, just do some tests. And I was like, like, so what would be a fun, so I went in and did some baseline QEG scans. So they basically, I don't know if for a QEG is basically like, there's like a cap they put on your head with some gel and electrodes. There's about, I think, 19 of them or so, and a couple clips on your ears. And essentially it's through some stimuli. It's then analyzing like, areas of your brain. It can see where things are upregulated, downregulated, see if you have any anxiety, other traits, or ADHD, et cetera. And so I did my baseline, and I was like, well, it'd be cool to see maybe how like different substances, like, what the effect on me. So in particular, like like caffeine or nicotine gum, or methylene blue, et cetera, or something like kava. And so I would go in, and we would do, like, obviously can't do them all in the same day. So I would go in and just sort of go through the same procedure. Like, we'd say, okay, let's, take what you're going to take, and then we'll get the data. And then Dr. Hill we'd do a call, and he'd review all the charts, and there's all sorts of data in there that I don't even understand. It's like very detailed, but he can distill it. And it was interesting because, with like caffeine, for example, like I love coffee in the morning. It's like, actually, if you ask me what my favorite nootropic is, I'm going to say caffeine. That's just, I just love it. And it was, and the QEG almost basically validated it, because it was saying that how caffeine, for me, it actually makes me less, like, it makes me like less jittery. It makes me more focused. And so, which totally makes sense, because in the morning, like, I'm drinking coffee and I'm just consuming information. That's my time of day to sort of like process and consume information. And it talked about how, like, it definitely wakes me up. It turns down my impulsiveness. But he did say there was, like, for caffeine, like, there was like a U-shaped curve. So, like, if I slammed a whole bunch of like giant coffees or whatever, it's going to have obviously some negative impacts there. And then, I mean, again, because I'm a fast metabolizer of caffeine, I can drink it, and, half an hour later, it's fine. I can drink coffee before bed, essentially, and it won't keep me up. I've always been able to do that. It's one of my superpowers that I've always had. Yeah. But when we did the methylene blue experiment, so, like, I'd reached out to you. I was like, hey, can you hook me up with some product for this experiment? And you're like, sure. And you sent it right out. And so it was really, of all the things I took, apparently this was like the one that was like the aha, like, whoa, what is going on here? Because it basically it made me more relaxed, but more like, it's more relaxed, but more awake, if that makes sense. Wow. Yeah. Like, so essentially what it's acting as, like, I mean, he said, like, it helps on both ends of the activation spectrum. So if I need to, it brings me up when I need to come up, and it brings me down and balances me if I need to, like, settle down a little bit. Wow. And he said, like, my baseline QEG showed a little bit of, like, some brain fog and maybe like a slight bit of anxiety, just my baselines. And he said with the methylene blue, that stuff just, like, went away. It wasn't detectable after taking, just a little bit of it. And it also had major benefits for focus, et cetera. So basically, like, I think his summary was like, hey, Bob, if you're going to go give a talk somewhere, like, or whatever, methylene blue is probably going to be like a great, like, thing to have, obviously they'll have the blue tongue and everything, but,
well, you can, but it was, it too.
So it was one of those things that showed, like, this is like an acute effect also. Like, this isn't like, I wasn't taking this like chronically, like every day and whatever. This is like a small amount taken at one time, away from anything else. And so it was cool just to see, like, through data, through validation, that, for me, now again, take me and 9 other people, our results are going to be probably, somewhat different. Like, there's going to be a standard deviation or distribution curve, or whatever you want to call it. So, but I just knew for me now, by having that data, I know things that I could take. Similarly, like, if I took something like kava, I know it mellows me out and settles me down and all that. And actually too much kava, apparently would creates anxiety. So for me, so for me, it's like, whatever, if you go to, like, if you've ever been to a kava bar or whatever, it's like, yeah, have a little kava. For me, it was fine. But, like, again, it's all about how much you're taking, or, in what circumstances.
Yeah. One of the things you highlighted there, to me, is particularly important, that, like, the benefits of these experiments are you get to learn, what works well for you versus other people, right? Because how you described methylene blue, and don't get me wrong, like, I take methylene blue every day. I get a lot of benefits out of it. I don't get the same benefits that you do. The way you describe methylene blue is almost what nicotine does for me. Like, I have, like, it brings me up when I'm down, it brings me down when I'm up, that kind of thing. And so, one of the reasons why I want to have this conversation for you is to with you, is because it highlights, how individual we are, and how there's almost this so long as you can afford it, like there's this need for experimentation in order to determine what's good for you. And it's beautifully said. Bob, I want to go into a little bit about Awesome Labs and some of the other things you're doing now, because my top referral in the App Store right now is PepCalc. And so everybody I know that has been into peptides, I send people to that app, and that includes over any other app, funny enough. But so tell me a little bit more about what your business partner, Jeremy, have been up to. Let's go a little bit down that route, because you have a few things going on there.
Sure. So, as we alluded to earlier, Jeremy and I first met back in like that first biohacking conference, and he was working in tech. He was a developer. He was working at a hedge fund. I was running my businesses. We were friends kind of socially. And it wasn't until we both had a time in our lives where we were like, what are you working on? What are you working on? I'm like, I don't know. We were like, want to just get together and start kicking around some ideas. And, we get together at a WeWork locally and just start, thinking of things. And we just decided, that we both had been doing software and tech for a while, but our blind spot was I never really, because I was running businesses, by the time you grow a business, mobile was taking off and apps and stuff like that. But I was not coding any of that stuff anymore because I was running the business. And similarly on his end, he was doing other stuff. So I was like, let's just get really good at building mobile apps. Let's figure it out. And so we kind of like spent a year, like basically becoming really good at building mobile apps, just learning for ourselves. And we started Awesome Labs out of that, which is essentially just a technology studio we use to launch consumer-based kind of health, wellness, other areas, some Web3 stuff as well, products. And sometimes we throw something out there and see if it resonates or not. And sometimes things take off. Sometimes they don't. Some things make a lot of money. Some things don't make any money. Some things we're happy to give to the world for free. And we built products around, I think the first product we ever launched was a photo-based meal tracking app. And this is,
I remember that. Yeah.
There was no AI at the time or anything like that. This is literally like, we were just trying to timestamp photos of meals and put it in a way that you can see what's going on. And so like that, if you see some like popular apps out there now, they'll kind of look a little like the UI looks a little bit similar. So, but we were like, because we were working on that and we were like, well, what we should really be working on. And we were like, we started thinking about, because everyone else had the same idea, like we're going to build a tool that will empower any health coach to pull in all the data from all their clients into one thing and have communication and chat and all this other stuff. And when we were like, oh man, there's like 1 million people working on this thing. Like that's not really something. So, but every time we build something, like we're basically, sharpening our coding pencil and all that. We're like, we're getting better at building apps. And then we launched a basic, a lot of our apps come out of personal pain points. And one was this breathwork app called Awesome Breathing. And it was basically, I was frustrated because I just wanted something that's like basically a glorified timer, something that I can just use with like a pacer, that I didn't need to have the programs and all the other bells and whistles that like you make it with meditation apps. I just wanted something that I can put in a breathing pattern, set a time, whatever, maybe have some, if I need some bells or audio cues. And so we built that. And we kind of just put it out there, and it just took off, like got really popular around the world. Even to this day, it's very popular. And so we were like, that's cool, but like, that's not really making any money. So, well, then we ran into we started experimenting, peptides are becoming popular.
Yep.
For those of you that don't, I'm sure your listeners are fairly familiar with peptides, but there's a powder that has to be reconstituted with bacteriostatic water. And depending on how you mix the ratios of that, and it goes into a syringe, and there are different syringe sizes that have different, measures. And it's very, it gets a bit confusing to figure out, well, how much am I actually taking to, what do I need to do to get this amount? And we were doing it in spreadsheets. We were basically computing what we needed in spreadsheets. And one day, Jeremy and I were looking at each other. We're like, why are we both doing this in spreadsheets? Like, let's just build an app. Yeah. It's like, to do this. And so we launched this app called PepCalc, and it's just a simple way for people to plug in their variables and whether it's one peptide or a blend of peptides, et cetera. And it just says, go to here. It's like, that's a sense, and it's, it's one of those things where like a simple utility, it just does what you need it to do. and we built that. And so we were building these types of products, and you'd be surprised, like that product is actually fairly successful. It's usually in the top 10.
I'm not joking when I say earlier that, so the number one, I still see a couple of clients, right, in that kind of health consulting, health optimization practice capacity. And the number one question you always get is like, how do I reconstitute the peptide? And rather than, me explaining it to them, I send them the link to your app, because it does all the math for them in a very easy to use user interface, right? And you're actually teaching somebody how to fish rather than fishing for them. So, as I said, it's a great app. So thank you for building it.
Awesome. Thanks. Yeah. Thanks for all the referrals. I mean, one thing I did notice was like, you can tell that peptides, and not just from like GLP ones and all that kind of stuff, but just generally peptides are in the public mindset a lot more, like even in the last few months, because we can see like just by how popular the app is in sales, like, wow, like there's a huge amount of the public that's just discovering the stuff that people have been doing for, several years already. But so that's pretty cool. But, and so about a little over a year ago, Jeremy and I had been sharing my supplement stack through my blog. My personal blog was quantifiedbob.com. And like, I would be like, here's what I'm taking. I'm adjusting my stack. And I even set up like a GitHub repository where I could show you the changes I'd make each month and all that. And Jeremy was doing some stuff in his own spreadsheet, and he was trying to calculate and add up all the like, oh, I've got 3 supplements that all have, B6 in it. And I want to make sure I don't take too much of it total. And we were like, why don't we just build an app? Oh, first we were looking for an app. Couldn't find one. Yeah, so we were like, we should just build one.
It's hard to find, right?
Yeah. So we're like, why don't we just build one? Because it's something that we've definitely wanted. And so we started building it. We kind of quickly built like an internal MVP. It wasn't anything we could release, but we got into there's a venture capitalist guy, Jason Calacanis, who's like, he's got a launch accelerator and those other things, but he has this one that's like a 12-week program for, like, basically you can come in with just an idea and they'll pick out of like 2,000 applicants, they'll pick, a small amount to go through the program. So we put SuppTrack through that. We kind of built SuppTrack. That's the app we built. It's gone through that. And then, earlier this year, we finally launched it. And so basically SuppTrack is like the all you need everything for organizing your supplement intake. So think about, scanning all your products, putting them in there, scheduling them, getting reminders, seeing the aggregated ingredient information. So you'll see like, if something has an RDA value, and you're like, oh my God, I'm taking way too much of this or too little of that. And so we kind of have what we consider like the V1 version 1 of it out there right now. And over the next few months, there's like all the fun stuff's going to start happening now, because we've really done some cool stuff with the data behind the scenes and the stuff that we can do in terms of insights and just sort of like the social aspects of it. People often want to share, what they're taking and all of that. So that's going to be, like I'm really excited about it. Like, this is like something that we're like, we actually spun this off. It's its own entity. So like, it's still Jeremy and I mean, again, 2 people can build this stuff. Like, you don't need 20 people to build, whatever. It's like 2 people, we code, we use AI for something, it's like we're very efficient. And obviously, yes, a company's going to have to scale at some point, and you will have to, you need resources for things, maybe like some additional support or whatever. But like, we're super scrappy, so we're like, if we don't have to pay for something, we're gonna do it like a startup. Yeah.
So I guess before I go into my last set of questions, Bob, I have to ask, because you got your finger on the pulse on the technology side. What's your opinion about Cursor and all this whole, I guess the cool kids call it vibe coding, right? What's your sort of firsthand take on all of that?
I mean, I love the concept. I mean, we use AI co-pilots while I'm coding. I mean, it saves me a lot of time. Sometimes it's like I can write, there's 2 ways you can approach it. I'm a coder already, so I can write a certain amount of code. I can kind of say, as a starting point, I have this, I need you to do this, this, and this, right? And it may or may not do it correctly. You got to kind of coax it, but you're like the coach, right? You're watching, you're observing, you're telling it what to do. For certain types of products, I would never do a full, like, the vibe coding thing is fun especially for non-coders.
Yeah.
Because basically you're just like, I have an idea. I want to make this into something. I don't know how to make it. Like, I mean, I don't know how to get in the, it'd be like me writing code right now, But the people who used to have to like do punch cards with little binary code, right? Like, I don't even, but essentially a programming language is just a layer to make it into that. So now we're getting into these, LLMs and stuff where you can kind of talk and it will spin it out. And I mean, we're seeing this stuff advance so fast that, I mean, my only thing with vibe coding would be just be careful. Like if something goes in like if someone builds a production quality thing, like I'm sure there's going to be like we've seen a lot of security issues and stuff that, but obviously it's early, but if you're just building a fun, personal project or you want to make a game or do something like that, like I love it. Like I mean, if I was a little kid and I was just like, oh, I can just like turn on the computer, talk to it and make a game. Cause that's what I did when I was a little kid, but I had to learn basic and I had to get code and like, make a stupid little game, right? Like a Pac-Man or whatever. And, so yeah, I think, it's the future is like, use these tools, like embrace them. It's not like, I don't see it like, oh, it's going to replace this or that. To me, it's like, it makes me more efficient. Again, we're a two-person company. And now we're like, we're using AI, not just from coding now. We've got some agents that we use for some data stuff that I know of another company trying to do it with like 6 people. Like we have 0. Like we literally just have AI agents that can do the work for us.
Yeah, we have an agent workforce as well internally, and this is partially because Ted knows he was at ground zero when it comes to artificial intelligence, and so I found it to be like a fantastic way to stay super lean, but also be able to exponentially increase your bandwidth. I use it for different things, right? Than you would, but I'm always curious. It's like my top question to ask anybody right now who's in the entrepreneurial realm is like, how are you using these tools? So,
I mean, it's trickling into, every aspect, right? So obviously from a work perspective, different ways, like you're using it across your enterprise. I'm predominantly using it from the product building, coding and all of that. Mm-hmm. We probably both use it for just fun, personal, social, like, the whole like, hey, take a picture and turn it into this or, so,
Ghibli, right?
Yeah, exactly. So like, we're seeing all that, but I do think, it's cool. Like if you're, especially for kids, like they're really creative anyway. Their minds are creative. And like, if they could just, spin something up, like it's pretty cool.
Awesome. A couple final questions for you, if you don't mind, Bob, because I know we're coming up on time here, but as we accelerate and this pace of acceleration increases, right? And artificial intelligence becomes more a part of day-to-day health, or, you have accelerated or like an equal acceleration equal acceleration and a decrease of lab cost, right? What are some concerns that you have about the health world? Are there any concerns that you have in sort of the pace that we're running at or the direction?
I mean, the whole like, not like move fast and break things kind of like mentality, but just like companies going under, like the 23andMe, where like they've got all your data and now your data.
That's a perfect example, right? Is that you have a company with all of your data where you have the founder who's expressed interest in just basically buying the data, right? But that could be an example. But let's say you have people that are going out there and spending all this money on lab tests, and you have a world where it's becoming a lot easier to become an influencer, right? What kind of concerns do you have for the average health consumer as they're approaching their own health?
Well, sure. I mean, there are people, if they're being influenced by what they see, whether scrolling, through their socials or whatever, and it's some product or tool or whatever, and something that looks all sexy. How are they getting that information? Or, are they being informed? They're being tricked. I mean, obviously like being sold miracle pills or whatever. It's like, I don't know, like some of it, there's some legality around things too. Like, I mean, we do have laws in the, at least in the United States, like Federal Trade Commission. So my previous career,
company, we're going full circle here. Let's go back.
So the company that I exited, when we first started, we were part of what was called the Word of Mouth Marketing Association. It was the first industry association around consumer-led marketing, like telling your friends about a product and how do you disclose it? How do you be honest? And we helped generate the FTC guidelines that are used to this day about disclosure, like transparency. Like you have to say if am I being paid by this company. It was like given the product, you have to be, there's rules about it, and so obviously it's not well enforced still to this day from what I can see. I see a lot of, stuff being posted, but to your point about, your question around consumers, I think they're getting overwhelmed with information.
Yeah.
And often it's just like, whether it's a loved one, like a parent or whatever, or just a friend, like I get emails all the time where like, what do you think of this? I saw this ad on Instagram, like, and I'll have to explain like, well, it looks promising, but it hasn't been proven in humans yet. And you have 5 other things that you should be addressing before you have to worry about optimizing that. Because like you've got other low hanging fruit you should be taking care of first. Don't waste your money yet on, because I think people get their priorities also a little mixed up. They want to find that quick miracle thing, but they don't realize there's other things they need to sort of get addressed first. So I don't know, like how, consumers are just, I think actually what I've found is like younger people seem to be a little more skeptical. They've grown up around this stuff, and I feel like they do have better, they can kind of like sense it better than like, and when I say older, I'm saying older, even people like Gen X, Gen Z, because there's a generation that like these folks grew up, they grew up online, they grew up with social media, and so those younger folks, I think, they seem to have a better ability to really see through it.
Beautiful. Bob, final question here, and is the question we ask everybody on the podcast, which is, if you're going to give one piece of advice for somebody to live smarter, not harder, what would it be?
I would say, don't be so hard on yourself all the time.
Oh, like that's a good one for me.
I think, we and some people, it's just their personal, like, I mean, I think me and you are probably like similar, like, we're probably doing fine. Like, you might be kicking butt in all these different ways, but you're always putting pressure, putting yourself down internally, even if you like on the outside, you might be like, no one even can sense it, but inside you're just like beat yourself down. That's a big stressor, and that's a big, issue. And I think just people in general, I think, are just, it's okay to like make mistakes every now and then, especially, not serious mistakes, but like, we make little mistakes now and then, like, and okay, it's okay. Like, don't be so hard on yourself, because I just feel like that pressure, like, I know for me, at least personally, like if you look at me like 20 years ago, like that, I was putting that pressure on myself, and I thought I was I was able to bury it and all that. And then you do some of these like diagnostics and all that, and people are like, whoa, you're really like, you've got some issue, and you could, like those, yeah, I mean, physiologically you can't hide it.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I would say that to me, because, if you want to live smarter, and make it not harder, then don't be so hard on yourself.
Bob Troia, where can we find out more about you? SuppTrack, Awesome Labs, all that fun stuff.
Sure. So, my socials are at Quantified Bob. So it's like the Instagram, Twitter, quantifiedbob.com is my blog where I share a lot of this information. SuppTrack is the new app we just launched. So, we'd love for everyone to check it out. Right now it's in the US. We'll be expanding into other countries soon. And that's at SuppTrack.app. So SUPP track.app. And our other products are under Awesome Labs. So that website is justawesome.com.
That's a great name for a website, by the way. All right. Bob, always a pleasure catching up with you, my friend. I look forward to doing it again in person. So thank you very much. For everybody listening out there, have a wonderful day, and always remember, try to live smarter, not harder. And I guess in Bob's words, don't be so hard on yourself. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful day. All right, we just wrapped up a phenomenal conversation. And what I like about my conversations with Mr. Bob Troia is that no matter what or when, I always learn something from him. In this case, there was a lot I didn't know about his personal history, and I really enjoy that. Bob is one of those people who, again, he is one of the more genuine people in the health industry, always there to help, always there to be a good resource. And I encourage you all to check out the work that he's doing, whether it be with Awesome Labs, SuppTrack, or quantifiedbob.com. You can check out all the show notes for this one at either transcriptions.com or homehope.org. Thank you for listening, and please enjoy life smarter, not harder.